So we're gonna move next to our panelists, and I'll just here. Our moderator is Corrine Ishio. She's a headhunter and founder of My Working Soul. Corrine is a global talent acquisition leader with a track record of success in recruiting and hiring for emerging industries, especially cybersecurity and data science. Her reputation extends to the alternative wellness space, scaling several plant-touching cannabis companies like Lord Jones, Click Spray, and MedMen. Her innate understanding of the challenges, opportunities, and potential in psychedelics go beyond surface level. She formerly interned at several pharmaceutical companies, including Receptos, completed advanced courses in pharmacological chemistry at UCSD, and was a founding partner for a topical CBD brand based in California. Her optimistic advocacy for the growth of the psychedelic industry includes passionate ambassadorship to heighten awareness and understanding of the benefits of psychedelics for people from all walks of life.
But yes, I'm excited to be here. Super proud as a very passionate Triton to see all of the great research at the UC Psychedelic Centers. Awesome. And I'll just welcome each of our panelists to sit here at the front of our presentation today. And coming up first, there's Dr. Lynn Marie Mariski. Welcome. As well as Kate Roberson, Cristianna Hougland, and then Kevin Canella. And thank you so much to our MCs for introducing me. I'd love to start by having each of our panelists self-introduce themselves for about 30 seconds. Oh, and then there's Jeff. Wonderful.
Is this on? Hi, I'm Lynn Marie Morsky. By training, I'm a physician in family medicine and sports medicine, as well as an attorney. 4.5 or so years ago, I left clinical medicine and decided to make my mission educating clinicians on psychedelics. So I started the Psychedelic Medicine podcast, which is now 4.5 years old. And then 1 year later, I founded the Psychedelic Medicine Association, which is an association for clinicians where we educate clinicians of all types on psychedelics so they feel comfortable having those discussions about psychedelics with their patients and referring when appropriate.
Wow, you went through that really fast. I will not be that fast. Kaitlin Roberson here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cacti Therapeutics, and we are actually developing new chemical entities, so a second generation of psychedelics for chronic pain. So the last conversation was really interesting to me, and I'll delve more into that when I get to pitch in the showcase later. So other interesting things about me, my background's in developmental psychology. I spent most of my career in the humanitarian field working with the refugee population. I'm really interested in how early childhood trauma impacts our health through the lifespan. And in my free time, I like to box, race, and triathlons. And I have 4 kids and 8 pets, so I'm a part-time zookeeper.
Wow, I love it. First, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for having me here, and I'm really honored to share my unique perspective in psychedelics. And one thing I did want to mention was I do want to talk about that. I do feel like we're not destigmatizing psychedelics. I do feel like we're re-educating and we're kind of reframing the way we think about psychedelics. We are abundant in psychedelics through nature. Even a blade of grass has DMT in it. So with that being said, my name is Cristianna Hougland, and I am the founder and owner of Mushee Medicinal, which is a functional mushroom company. And I'm currently building out a botanical biopharmaceutical company. I won the Psilocybin Cup of 2022 for best microdose, and I also loved box as well, and I own a Great Dane named Lady.
Hey, everybody. My name's Kevin Canella. I'm the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit. We're called Thank You Life, and we give financial assistance to people who cannot afford psychedelic therapy. We work with 75 ketamine clinics all over the US and give financial assistance to those in need. My background is as a psychotherapist, and I have a deep history with psychedelics before I got into psychotherapy. And yeah, a lot of my drive comes from really wanting to alleviate suffering in humanity. And I'm hoping that our organization can do some of that. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Adler, and big thanks to Mifang and Leah, wherever they're hiding, for hosting this here today at Aquilius. A very cool thing, and a very bold move, really, to showcase this frontier area of science. Great to also hang out with some of the distinguished speakers and thought leaders that have shared the stage with us, and not least everybody here who's taken the time to share their interest in a remarkable area of science. I'm an entrepreneur here in San Diego. I've built a couple companies over the last 24 years. And I'm really here from the perspective of a individual who also is sort of a newly minted, as Fadel said, not so much with the clinical trial with a group of people, but an individual clinical trial, or N of one. So I'm happy to share my journey, my lessons, and the implications of those lessons for anyone else who's interested.
Wonderful. And if we could have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Wow, you guys are a great audience. And just to start with Dr. Lynn Marie, I'd love to hear a little bit more from your background and expertise in regards to any contraindications to psychedelic therapy, and how the non-hallucinogenic psychedelics may help expand access to populations with contraindications. And if you could define contraindications for us too.
Great start. Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. So as I think was mentioned, at least briefly in some of the other talks, is that there are certain people who have medical conditions, physical or mental, or perhaps a medication they are taking that make it unsafe for them to do psychedelics. Now, what you should realize about this field is that we're learning every day what is a contraindication. Something we might think initially, oh, that person with that diagnosis should never do a psychedelic. We then study and find out, oh, perhaps they didn't have the negative effects that we thought they might have. And so the types of things that were initially being left out were patients who either had or had a first degree relative of things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis. And bipolar is a great example, is that when they finally did research on patients who have bipolar 2 disorder, it was actually not leading to the mania they were afraid of, and it did have resolution of their depression. So really positive findings. So the contraindications change all the time. But do recall that like these are safe for people for whom they will be safe, right? There are contraindications for each of the medicines. And that's why I love that Kimberly had brought up in her talk the non-hallucinogenics, because there are people for whom that just the hallucinatory part might be the contraindication. If they have a schizophrenia or a psychosis, psychotic disorder, again, we're still studying the schizophrenia, but we have not yet studied psychotic disorder. But it may be that the hallucination isn't for them. They still deserve at least the cellular level healing, the neuroplasticity, the neurogenesis. As she was saying, there are certain things that trip may be necessary, but there are things that are being studied, like DMT is being studied for stroke because it can regrow neurons. At that point, the trip is probably not necessary. So the non-hallucinogenics would be very helpful for both the indications where a trip is not needed, and also in those for whom a hallucination is contraindicated.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I'm sure our audience does as well. And then Kate, going off of that, what advice do you have for those considering psychedelic use for the first time?
Well, I always say that if you're thinking about it for the very first time, keep thinking about it and keep reading about it. Don't just dive right in. Get a lot of support around. Do your research. Do your research on who the facilitator is going to be, who the guide is going to be. Think about, what is going to be the best setting for your journey and what's going to be the best support around the journey too. Because I firmly believe that the more preparation you do going into a journey and the more integration after the journey, the more benefit you'll receive from the journey itself. The journey is, depending on the medicine, it can be a few hours or it can be almost a half a day, or with Ibogaine more than, a couple days. And there will be things that surface, insights that you will gain during that journey. But then those insights, those revelations have to be integrated into your life. And one of the things that's really important is to make sure that you have your body's full permission to full consent to go to those hard hidden areas of your subconscious. In terms of internal family systems language, I like the idea of getting permission from your protectors, your managers, the parts of you that are trying to shelter very wounded, maybe young parts of you. And if you don't get the permission from those parts of you, then after the journey, you can have something called backlash, where it's really hard to integrate whatever has come up. And so, some people say a psychedelic journey is like condensing, 10 years of psychotherapy into 10 hours. That's true in some ways, but that there's a negative side to that too. If your body's whole system isn't ready to go there that quickly, then that can be very challenging to implement the insights afterwards. So lots of preparation, lots of integration, and make sure that you're surrounded with support, people that you can talk to. Since there is so much stigma, I've had patients come to me and say, they don't know anyone who's done psychedelics and they can't talk about it. I've had people from other countries, for example, say, in the place where they're at, they cannot talk to their doctor about doing an ayahuasca journey or MDMA therapy. They can't talk about it with their friends or family. So then they go off and do a journey like that, and they don't have anyone in their core networks, their friends and their family to process with. That can be really challenging. So lots of support before and after.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Can I just throw something out there with that too? Is there's a nonprofit, I believe it's called Fireside. It's an app, and yeah, it's just one button, and it will call somebody. And whether you want some prep help, some integration help, or whether you're high by yourself and just really need someone to talk to, they have just like a free service for that. So
Yeah, the number is 62 Fireside.
Yes, thank you. And, brief show of hands in the audience, if you care to disclose, is anyone considering a psychedelic journey after the symposium? All right, we
Immediately
can talk to you
following.
afterward.
is anyone high right now?
And Cristianna, you have such a impressive following on social media. So I'd love your perspective as someone who's tapped into the culture in this way, with over 28,000 followers. From your perspective, how have psychedelics influenced popular culture in recent years?
Thank you for asking that question. So I do feel like because we are reframing and we are in this re-education behind psychedelics, that with social media very prevalent in our lives today, that even just the smallest person that's like a micro influencer or someone who even has 100 followers can really showcase what their experience is behind psychedelics. And that in turn starts that snowball effect into the correct or the right direction in order for us to all be integrated in this world. And so I do feel that the media has had an influence in how we perceive psychedelics. I mean, Ray was talking about in the 80s, and I'm sure there was stuff with Nixon, right, with drugs as well. And so I think that, our media today is going towards that route of positivity.
I love that. And personally, when I was inviting different folks to this event today, I had a lot of responses that referenced Dazed and Confused as their foremost reference. So if anything, I'm glad that we now have a lot of reference points from the symposium today as well. Although Dazed and Confused is a great movie. And Kevin, I'd love to hear from you. And this is a bit of a broad question, but what would you say is considered psychedelic therapy, especially with regard to your expertise in mental health?
Yeah, so I think something interesting to talk about is like what is a psychedelic, and one of the talks before was kind of mentioning this. So ketamine isn't quite considered a psychedelic. It's considered a dissociative anesthetic. But basically, for all intents and purposes of what we're talking about, it's under the umbrella of psychedelic therapy, and really the only legal form of psychedelic therapy at this moment, other than these clinical trials that we've been hearing about. What also is included in that, I would say, is the psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, DMT are the big three kind of classical psychedelics, and then MDMA is in a similar sort of bucket as ketamine, where it's not a classical psychedelic, but again, for the sort of industry that we're talking about, it has really similar effects when used in conjunction with therapy. It's great to help heal trauma. So I don't know, it's a little bit of an answer for everybody.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And it's interesting because today, with all of the diverse speakers that we've had, we've been exposed to psilocybin, of course, as well as DMT, LSD. So what's considered a psychedelic? It's so important to demystify that term. So thank you. And Jeff, I'm really eager to learn from you. What would you say are the possibilities of consciousness in terms of becoming a recognized field of study in healthcare?
Whoa, whoever can answer that, I want them. Well, Corrine, because we've chatted quite a bit in recent weeks as a preview to today. What I can say is I am personally fascinated by this intersection of the clinical research that's being done responsibly above ground, current state with Fadel and hundreds of like-minded researchers across the country, and I do think we are, on first base when it comes to that. But in parallel with that, I think there is, a nascent movement in play, and in fact, at UCSD, there is a School of Compassion and Empathy, or a program, I should say. It's an institute, which I think Fadel is wrapped around as well, that is studying and teaching in the area of mindfulness and consciousness. And being a San Diegan, new to this field, don't purport to be anywhere close to an expert. Anybody that claims that they are, I would ask you to think twice about alliance with them. But being a student of the field and trying to listen and learn, every molecule in my body tells me that studying mindfulness and trying to extract from the research this intersection between, if I dare say, the physical laws of the universe and the spiritual laws of the universe, and what we can learn from that, I think we ought to pay very close attention.
I appreciate that. And I'm someone who considers myself a student of thinkers like Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, of course. I'm a yoga teacher as well. So I appreciate the other dimensions, aside from substances themselves, that can help access that consciousness level. And Dr. Lynn Marie, I'd love to learn from you, coming off of the question that Kevin addressed about what psychedelics means. Why should we use the term psychedelics instead of plant medicine when discussing these types of therapies?
I first have to say I was very pleased that I've seen basically everybody today has used the term psychedelics. And I have to admit, when I first got into the field, my podcast, which is currently called the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast, used to be called the Plant Medicine Podcast. And there are two reasons why I think it's really important that we choose the word psychedelic. No, the first one is very basic. The second one is a little deeper. The first one is people confuse it. They would, oh, she talks about plant-based medicine. Well, that's veganism, right? Like, we are so far from psychedelics at that point, right? The second is much more important. Professor Carl Hart has this concept called psychedelic exceptionalism, which is where, unfortunately, drugs that people who have means do are put up here and seen as medicines, and then drugs that people without means do, people are incarcerated for. And so when I see on social media people saying, oh, I do plant medicine, they're doing the same illegal drugs that other people will be put in jail for. And I think it just, to me, seemed like such a euphemism. And so, let's call what these are. These are the same psychedelics that put people in jail, right? Like we are finding ways to use them as medicines, and the clinical trials will help us legalize them and bring them into FDA approval. But I think we need to stop euphemizing that, like, oh, the ones that certain categories of people use for certain things have this kind of euphemistic name, and these other ones that other people use are it's part of the, I will say destigmatization, because there's a stigma with saying the word psychedelics, right? If you think it's brave to host a thing on psychedelics, oh, but we'll host something on plant medicine because it sounds, it's less out there. I'm out there, right? Like, I will tell anybody I have used psychedelics. I study psychedelics. I promote the safe use of psychedelics. That's why I just think it's important to choose our words to help destigmatize, to help educate, and to help equalize and prevent psychedelic exceptionalism from landing more people in jail.
Can I piggyback on that since
Of
you
course,
brought up
please
Dr.
do.
Carl Hart? I do fit the category of the mom in the minivan who came to an understanding of the therapeutic use of psychedelics late. So I didn't have any drug use in my 20s. I grew up in a really conservative family. I do remember the commercial, the egg frying. So there was a lot of fear and stigma around drug use. And when I started following the research, though, around reopening critical learning periods, because I was really interested in healing attachment trauma and developmental trauma in children. So I started looking at the research. I decided that personally, I needed to dive all the way in. So I read Carl Hart's book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups. And that is kind of like plunging into the deep end. I didn't start with Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, or one of the, easier reads. For a psychedelic newbie, I decided to go all in and see his perspective. And so I agree with you that I think it's really important to, as part of destigmatizing all of this and just helping the public become more open-minded around all medicine is a healing tool that in the right setting, in the right place, even fentanyl is an amazing drug in surgery. So, we have to start understanding drugs as, there's a place and time for them.
Thank you so much. And Cristianna, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experiences sharing psychedelics and psychedelic use via social media. Has there been any very intriguing discoveries that you've made in terms of people's misconceptions or preconceptions about it on social media? And how does your content help demystify?
So what I've noticed is that with myself sharing my experiences on social media is that it does help re-educate my audience in order to be more receptive to taking a psychedelic. And to piggyback on what you guys are both were saying, I totally agree with that. I think it is a yes and. There are cultures that do prefer to say plant medicines as well. So we do want to be respectful of that. But I think when I do share with psychedelics, or if I do say plant medicines as well, is that people, again, are more receptive to that. But I've noticed that when I'm sharing my perspective on it, that it does help re-educate people more in the field. And I am somebody that maybe they can relate to. I am somebody that maybe they can find comfort in saying, oh, well, she's going against the grain. So you're kind of sticking it a little bit in to the man a little bit in that sense. So I will say that I would encourage everyone here to talk about your stories, share about your stories, because it does help. I'm not the only one that has a voice. All of you also have a voice involved in this journey.
I love that message. Thank you so much. And Kevin, I really appreciate your insight in terms of how the stigmatization of psychedelics impedes or influences even access to people who need this therapy.
Yeah. And yeah, I appreciate what you were saying just about how just one way we can start to destigmatize it. And yeah, Corinne, after we were speaking about this, I was really trying to think deeply about all the ways that the stigmatization can impede access. And I think some ways are more direct and others are more indirect. But I think what I was coming to is that ultimately there's people and organizations that get into an industry. And I think for this really new nascent industry, a lot of that looks like capital investment, um, philanthropic donors, grant making organizations, governments who can potentially make grants, and even corporations doing sponsorships or other kinds of things. And what we've been seeing at Thank You Life is there's some people and organizations that this is already very on brand for. And I think like Dr. Bronner's is a great example. They were our first corporate sponsor. They were also the first company that Enthea was able to sort of sell to. Enthea is a company that gives ketamine as a medical benefit, just like you can add vision or dental onto your benefits package. They enable you to add ketamine on. And Dr. Bronner's was the first one for that. So, there are some companies that are gung ho and it's very on brand for them to be edgy in this sort of way. And I would say by and large, a lot of companies are not quite ready for something like that. And I think we find the same thing with governments and also just grant making organizations where, since 2020, really, mental health has become such a focal point for people. And that has been great. But then, so a lot of organizations we look to get grants from, they'll specifically mention mental health as something that they're wanting to fund. But then when we come in with the psychedelic angle on it, they're still very hesitant around this. And, sometimes they say it's for the lack of research purposes, but I think a lot of that has to do with stigma. And I think if there was not the stigma, the research that is here would be more sufficient for them.
Thank you, Kevin. And Jeff, this is a bit of a turn, but as someone who's built several businesses in many industries, you've been in the restaurant business, you've been in ed tech, you're now in healthcare. How has your personal journey in terms of business, as well as your journey with psychedelics, how has that influenced your perspective of the space? And also, how would you encourage our community here on how they can be responsible advocates, especially considering the legal parameters around this industry and space right now? What's your perspective on that?
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of ways I could try to answer that question, which is packed with some thoughts that I have. But I would just say, kind of tying back to Ray, wherever he is, our gladiator. Where's our gladiator? The man with whom I share a very similar haircut. All right. So, I would I support what Ray was saying earlier during his share with us, which is that as an entrepreneur and an alpha male kind of entrepreneur that puts head and heart every day, and has done so for maybe 30 plus years. There's a cost to that, emotionally, spiritually, physically, physiologically. There's a cost with that. And my recent relationship with plant medicine, very grateful to have intersected with this at my time and place. I'm 55 now, and about a little over a year ago, we bumped into one another. And that was, as the universe would have because of a family crisis with our dear son. So I went in first to kind of check out magic mushrooms to see if perhaps it could be helpful to my son. And the medicine said, why don't you pay attention to yourself first? Because you've got some stuff in the basement to figure out. So it's been extraordinary. And with that, it's in the process of cleaning up some gigantic blind spots in my entrepreneurial world and what I am choosing to do with my life today, tomorrow, if I'm blessed to have tomorrow. And so the clarity, the gratitude, the smashing of the ego, humility, all of this, has direct impact on how I choose to use my breath to build businesses and contribute back to the community.
Thank you for showcasing that vulnerability. I really personally appreciate that because we have a lot of really great insights from a clinical perspective today. But what you've just shared, Jeff, really highlights the real-time impact on families, on people's existences. So I truly appreciate that. And bring it back to a healthcare setting for a bit here, Dr. Lynn Marie. What would you say is required to integrate psychedelics into the mainstream medical model as we know it today?
So for a clinician like myself, family medicine clinicians, they're the ones seeing and patients first. They're like the gatekeepers, and they're also writing 80% of antidepressant prescriptions. That's generally where a patient shows up first. And for a primary care doc to feel comfortable referring to something like psychedelic therapy, think about how they would refer to a cardiologist right now. They would refer to somebody who has gone through a they've done their board certification, they've taken the exam, and they've done a fellowship in cardiology. And we need things akin to that. We need to know which psychedelic therapy training programs are good. We need to set some standards that say, like, if your therapist has gone through this training program, they know that they are familiar with the origins and the traditions and also the medical contraindications, and they've done a practicum and all these things. And then there should be a licensing exam so that when clinicians refer to them, we feel comfortable knowing, okay, this patient is in safe hands. And there's also going to be somebody that if it goes wrong, we can go to that board and report them, and hopefully there will be remediation. That's lacking right now. Like even with ketamine clinics, unfortunately, there's no regulation on what's a proper dose of ketamine, or the proper administration, or who should get it, and all these things, right? And so like you might send somebody for ketamine therapy for pain, and they're getting the dose for something else, and their pain doesn't get better. So for integration into the medical model, we need those kinds of certification of training programs, certifications of the practitioners, and then just education on the clinician level of what this looks like. It's more like a surgical model. It's less like, hey, I'm giving you Prozac, you'll take it every day. It's more like a psychospiritual surgery where you do the preparation, like you said, which is the same thing as regular surgery. You might prepare for the surgery. You get a clearance, a medical clearance to make sure you're safe enough medically to do the surgery. You go in, you do the journey or journeys. And then afterward, you have, in surgical, like orthopedic, you'd have like a physical therapist afterward that gets you back. Well, you have an integration therapist that helps get you back afterward. So all those things need to be in place. And then I envision a future, since we have thinkers in this room, like great thinkers, I'm just putting this out there, and I know people are working on it, but keep on putting this out. I envision a future of personalized psychedelic medicine, just like personalized medicine. Like, God, if we can get to where your genes can tell us this psychedelic will be more effective for you than trying this psychedelic for the condition you want, you'll have a better reaction. Decreasing bad trips. Like he said, bad trips are, less likely if you're in a clinical setting, but not likely. Like they still happen. There's still challenging experiences. Please check out this challenging experiences project. If we can get to personalized medicine where we can decrease that and maximize the efficacy, I'd love to see that future.
I love that. Thank you. And it's wonderful because everyone here on this panel has started a business, whether it's a nonprofit or just a business. And so coming to you, Kate, in terms of your experiences as a female entrepreneur, really leading the charge in this industry in so many ways, especially in pain management. What would you say, how are companies positioning themselves in the psychedelic space, especially in terms of pharmaceuticals and therapy?
That's a big question because as someone mentioned earlier, there are 80 companies now in the psychedelic emerging industry, and they span everything from selling substances, maybe not so legally online, to developing FDA approved pharmaceutical, and even in that lane of going after a new drug application and an FDA approved prescription medication, it's varies greatly among companies what their mandate is, what their indication areas are that they're going after. I mean, the vast majority of companies that emerged several years ago were looking at mental health as the indication, and it was mostly psilocybin for mental health. But now there's companies like mine that are looking at chronic pain as their main indication area. So it varies greatly how each of the companies, like their ethos, their core values, what if they're in it for the profit or if they're in it for the impact. I really firmly believe that we need everyone if we're going to roll out medicines like this that are a new form of therapy. I personally look at medicine from a biopsychosocial spiritual lens. And that means that we need so much education, so much advocacy around this. We have to look at all the systems that impact our health, from yoga and meditation to, like, we have to look at all the things that are influencing our health and well-being. And currently, psychedelics that require psychotherapy in conjunction with them, the problem is they don't fit our current medical model. And our current medical model is a sick model, right? It's a take a pill every day, kind of mask what's going on. Aside from like cancer therapy, where we're bringing people into remission, most of our conditions that we're treating with a daily medication. So there are a lot of parts of this whole equation that need to be solved. And really appreciated that the symposium started out with the legal frameworks, because we're going to have to better understand all of that to be able to provide the most access to the most patients.
Thank you. And with the last 5 minutes that we have left in this panel, I'd love to invite other people here to get personal if they feel comfortable doing that. So Cristianna, in terms of your journey in psychedelics, and whether that's building your personal brand or even in your own life, how has it affected you? And feel free to go as deep or not so deep as you like on that.
Thank you. Well, let's get deep. So, so I think with my personal journey, I started off with a kind of a macrodose in the beginning, about like maybe 7-8 years ago. Definitely was not ready for that. I was never taught about what to feel like, how to act during or before or after. No way or shape or form was I prepared for that. I'm not a believer in a bad trip at all. I think that what psychedelics do is they shed light onto the things that are surfacing, that maybe that you put away in the closet and that you are afraid to look at. And so growing up, I definitely was suppressing things. I had anxiety, I had depression, that I don't have depression. It was definitely toxic positivity throughout my whole life. And that dose just really put me off my rocker. I was like, okay, I'm going to close that door. I'm not going to do that again. And then I was in a long-term relationship years ago, and this person told me that you should be microdosing for your anxiety. And this is 4 or 5 years ago. I said, what's that? I don't know what that is. And I was resistant to it. I realized it was mushrooms at the time. And so I basically, did my own research. And then during COVID, I was like, hey, this is the best way to do it. I don't have any work. I don't, have to go through anything dramatic during like a work day or on the weekend. So I just decided, I was like, let me just try this little pill. And did that little pill really change my life? I wouldn't say I had this like big aha moment that you could have with a macrodose, but it definitely made me realize that the person that I was with at the time, we were just not good together. And then slowly after that, I ended up, really looking more deeply into myself. And because of that little pill that I would take 2 or 3 times a week, it allowed me to make better lifestyle choices for my life. And I looked at my body as like a whole and not as like a mechanical function. And so I looked at like my work, my lifestyle, my workouts, what am I eating? It was like a really deep kind of like clean that I was doing. And so I really encourage all of you, if you haven't tried psychedelics, but you are interested I am a big believer in, trying a little microdose, something that, maybe can spark something in your brain to where you can help make a better lifestyle choice, as it did for me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it reflects the diversity of this space, as well as the myriad of different positions that people are taking. My background is I was a co-founder in a topical CBD brand here in San Diego, and just exploring the complexities of that marketplace with the distinction between recreational use, versus medicinal use, and what we're doing at UCSD in terms of sequencing the genome. So it's so important to reflect that diversity and that spectrum of thought, especially when we're thinking about all the possibilities inherent in this space. So I believe we are at our time, but we've really enjoyed having you here, having this conversation, and I encourage each of you to engage each of our wonderful panelists in conversation about their experiences and the exciting things that they're developing in this space as well. So thank you. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks.
Thank you, Corinne.
Huge thanks to our panelists and our moderator, Corinne.